What is this supposed to be? Some kind of performance art? Captain Marcus Thorne's voice cut through the low hum of the Creech Air Force Base dining facility like a snapped whip. His tone, dripping with condescension, was calibrated for maximum public effect. Every head in the cavernous room, from the junior-most airman nervously spooning chili mac to the seasoned master sergeants trying to enjoy a moment of peace, swiveled towards the source of the disruption. The target of his venom was an old man named Samuel Corbin, a civilian contractor tasked with keeping the floors clean. Samuel was on his hands and knees, meticulously working a stubborn black scuff mark near the salad bar. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy that Thorne, a man whose entire existence was predicated on speed, efficiency, and digital precision, interpreted as laziness. The old man wore a simple gray jumpsuit, faded at the knees and elbows, and his hands, gnarled and thick-knuckled like the roots of an ancient oak, held a simple rag. Thorne, by contrast, was a portrait of modern military perfection. His flight suit was immaculately tailored, adorned with the requisite patches that bespoke a career of flying remotely piloted aircraft from the comfort of a padded chair thousands of miles from any real danger. A state-of-the-art tablet was tucked under one arm, its screen glowing with targeting data from a simulated training exercise. He was young, sharp, and possessed an unshakable belief that his Ivy League education and mastery of advanced weapons systems made him superior to nearly everyone he encountered, especially a stooped, silent janitor. "I asked you a question, Pops," Thorne pressed, stepping closer so his polished black boots were inches from the old man's hands. "Is this a new mopping technique? The glacial pace method? Because the United States Air Force operates on a slightly faster tempo. We have a mission to conduct, and I don't need my pilots slipping on whatever grease you're just polishing into the linoleum." Samuel didn't look up. He simply continued his circular scrubbing motion, his breathing even and calm. He finished with the scuff, examined it for a moment with pale blue eyes that seemed to absorb the light without reflecting it, and then slowly, with a slight wince from his lower back, began to push himself to his feet. "It's clean now, sir," Samuel said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble, tinged with a faint accent that was hard to place. Not quite Southern, not quite Midwestern, but somewhere in the vast, forgotten heartland of the country. It was a voice that held no anger, no defensiveness, only a simple statement of fact. This calm defiance, this utter lack of intimidation, was like fuel on the fire of Thorne's arrogance. He thrived on the deference his rank commanded. He expected a stammered apology, a flustered explanation. The old man's placid dignity was an insult. "Don't you sir me with that tone," Thorne snapped, his voice rising in volume. The entire DFAC was now a silent theater, every airman a captive audience to the unfolding drama. "You work for the USAF, which means you work for me. Your job is to be fast, efficient, and invisible. Right now, you are failing at all three. Look at this place," he gestured expansively with one hand. "There are crumbs under that table. I saw a streak on the glass over the hot line. And you're down here, tending to a single scuff mark like it's a wounded soldier." A young airman first class named Leo Diaz, sitting with his squadron mates, felt a knot of discomfort tighten in his stomach. He'd seen the old man, Samuel, every day for the past 6 months. The guy was quiet, always kept to himself, but he was the most thorough cleaner the DFAC had ever had. The floors gleamed after his shifts. The glass was always spotless. He worked slowly, yes, but with a purposefulness that Leo, whose own grandfather was a carpenter, recognized as the mark of a true craftsman. This public humiliation felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Captain," one of Thorne's lieutenants murmured, stepping up beside him. "It's just the janitor. Let's get our food." Thorne brushed him off without a glance. He was performing now, cementing his reputation as a commander who demanded absolute perfection. He saw the dozens of young airmen watching, and he wanted them to see a leader in action. "No, Lieutenant. This is a teachable moment," Thorne announced loudly. "This is about standards. If we accept this level of apathy in our dining facility, where does it end? On the flight line? In the command center? Excellence is a habit." He turned his piercing gaze back to Samuel, who now stood fully upright, his mop and bucket beside him. The old man wasn't tall, but his posture, despite his age, was ramrod straight. "What's your name, old-timer?" "Samuel Corbin," the old man replied, his voice still infuriatingly level. "Well, Samuel Corbin," Thorne said, practically spitting the name. "Your standards are not our standards. I want this entire floor spotless in 10 minutes. If it's not, I'm going to have a talk with your supervisor at Consolidated Services, and you can take your little performance art piece to a civilian establishment." He punctuated his statement with a sharp, dismissive gesture. As he turned, his elbow clipped the tray of a young airman who was trying to slip past the confrontation. The tray, laden with a bowl of soup, a plate of chicken, and a large cup of soda, went flying. It clattered to the floor, splattering soup and soda in a wide, sticky arc directly at Samuel's feet. A collective gasp went through the room. The young airman froze, his face a mask of horror. "Captain, I'm so sorry, Thorne didn't even acknowledge him. He looked down at the mess, then up at Samuel, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. "Well, look at that. Your 10-minute mission just got a little more complicated. Better get to it, Samuel. The clock is ticking." He strode away towards the officers' line, his lieutenants trailing in his wake like remora fish. The DFAC remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the quiet drip of soda from a table edge onto the messy floor. Samuel Corbin looked down at the mess. He didn't sigh. He didn't curse. He simply bent down, again with that slow, painful-looking deliberation, and picked up the plastic bowl. He set it on the discarded tray. Then he reached for his bucket. Airman Leo Diaz couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, his own tray forgotten. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He was addressing Samuel. "Let me help you with that." Before Samuel could respond, another voice, sharp and authoritative, cut in. "Airman, sit down." It was Master Sergeant Eva Rostova, Leo's squadron NCO. She was a formidable woman with a gaze that could peel paint. She wasn't looking at Leo. She was staring daggers at the back of Captain Thorne. Leo sat, his cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and anger. He watched as Samuel retrieved his mop, dipped it in the bucket, and began the slow, methodical process of cleaning up a mess that was not his fault, under the humiliating gaze of 200 people. The old man's movements were precise, efficient. He started at the outside of the spill, working his way in, containing the liquid before absorbing it. There was no wasted motion. It was, Leo realized with a jolt, the most professional mopping he had ever seen. And as he watched the old man's gnarled hands expertly guide the mop, Leo noticed something else. A faint, silvery scar that traced the line of his left wrist, disappearing under the cuff of his gray jumpsuit. It was old, but it looked deliberate, not like an accidental cut. An idea, wild and improbable, began to form in Leo's mind. This old man, this janitor, was something more. He had to be. And Captain Thorne had just made the biggest mistake of his very polished career. The injustice of it all burned in Leo's gut. He knew he couldn't confront the captain directly, but there had to be something he could do. An institution like the Air Force had records. Everyone had a file. The knot in Leo Diaz's stomach had coiled into a cold, hard stone of resolve. He excused himself from the table, his appetite gone. He mumbled something to his friends about needing to check a duty roster and made his way out of the DFAC, deliberately avoiding the scene of the humiliation. He couldn't bear to watch Samuel work under the lingering shadow of Thorne's arrogance. His destination was a small administrative office attached to his squadron's common area. It was usually empty during lunch, and it contained what he needed, a networked computer terminal. As an orderly for the squadron commander, he had low-level access to the base personnel database, just enough to look up contact information, service records for awards packages, and basic duty statuses. It was a minor privilege, but today, he felt it might be the most important tool on the entire base. He sat down, the cheap office chair squeaking in protest, and logged in. The system interface was clunky, a relic of early 2000s government software design. He navigated to the Personnel Locator tab. There was a search field for military members and a separate, rarely used one for civilian contractors. He typed in the name the old man had given, Corbin, Samuel. He hit enter. The system whirred for a moment, the loading icon spinning lazily. Leo half expected it to come back with no record found or some basic employment data from Consolidated Services. What appeared on the screen made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. There was a file, but it was almost entirely blank. Name: Corbin, Samuel J. Affiliation: civilian contractor, GS equivalent. Step not applicable. Start date: redacted. Supervisor: redacted. Contact info: redacted. And then, at the top of the screen, was a banner. A bright, glaring, crimson banner that Leo had never seen before. In bold, block letters, it read, Flag Alpha Prime. Do not attempt to access, modify, or distribute. Report any inquiry to Wing Command Securfer immediately. Lethal force authorized to protect associated records. USSOCOM Directive 7A. Leo's blood ran cold. USSOCOM, United States Special Operations Command. What in the world did a quiet, elderly janitor have to do with the most elite, secretive fighting force on the planet? Lethal force authorized? It was unthinkable. This had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system. But the flag was there, stark and terrifying. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was so far above his pay grade it was in a different solar system. His first instinct was to close the window, delete his search history, and pretend he never saw it. Getting involved could mean the end of his career, or worse. But then the image of Samuel on his hands and knees, cleaning up Thorne's mess with quiet dignity, flashed in his mind. He thought of the cruel smirk on the captain's face. He couldn't just walk away. He made a decision. He wasn't going to call security forces. The flag itself felt like a warning against that. But he couldn't sit on this. He needed to talk to someone with more rank, more wisdom, and more courage than he possessed. He needed Master Sergeant Rostova. He found her back in their squadron headquarters, reviewing maintenance logs with a laser-like focus. MSGT, Rostova was a legend in the maintenance corps. She could diagnose a hydraulic leak from 50 yards away by the sound it made, and her crews consistently had the highest mission-capable rates in the wing. She was tough, fair, and had a built-in sensor for nonsense that was second to none. Master Sergeant, Leo began, his voice barely a whisper. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly at his pale, anxious face. What is it, Airman? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I think, he said, swallowing hard. Can I talk to you for a second? In private. Her expression shifted from mild annoyance to professional concern. She nodded towards her small, glass-walled office. In here. Shut the door. Leo did as he was told, the click of the latch sounding unervingly loud in the quiet office. He quickly recounted the scene in the DFAC, his voice filled with a frustration and anger he hadn't been able to show before. Rostova listened patiently, her expression unreadable, though Leo saw a muscle twitch in her jaw when he described Thorne kicking over the tray. That's unbecoming of an officer, but it's Captain Thorne's business, she said when he finished, her tone clipped. What does it have to do with me? Because I looked him up, Master Sergeant, Leo confessed, his words tumbling out in a rush. The janitor, Samuel Corbin. I looked him up in the database. Rostova's eyes hardened. You did what? Diaz, you know better than to poke around in personnel files. That's a great way to get an Article 15-inch. I know, but I had to. And you need to see this. He took a deep breath and described the redacted file, the crimson banner, the USSOCOM directive, the phrase lethal force authorized. As he spoke, he watched every ounce of color drain from Master Sergeant Rostova's face. She, who had faced down furious colonels and stared into the screaming jet intakes of F-35s without flinching, looked genuinely shaken. For a full 30 seconds after he finished, she said nothing. She just stared at a point on the wall behind him, her mind clearly racing. Show me, she said finally, her voice low and tight. They walked back to the admin terminal together. Rostova stood behind Leo as he logged in and ran the search again. The screen with the crimson banner popped up, and she leaned in close, her eyes scanning every word. She read it once, then a second time. She let out a slow, controlled breath. Diaz, she said, her voice barely audible. Log out of this system. Go back to your dorm. You will not mention this file, this conversation, or Samuel Corbin to anyone. Do you understand me? But Master Sergeant, Captain Thorne. I will handle Captain Thorne. She cut him off, her voice now ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. What you did was a massive breach of protocol, Airman. But it was also the right thing to do. Now go. That's an order. Leo, thoroughly intimidated but also profoundly relieved, nodded and practically fled the office. Master Sergeant Rostova stood alone in front of the terminal for another minute. She had been in the Air Force for 22 years. She had been deployed to Bagram, AUTHORIZED, and places that didn't appear on public maps. She had seen things, but she had never, ever seen a personnel file flagged like this. Flag Alpha Prime wasn't a standard designation. It sounded ad hoc, created for a situation so unique that the normal classification systems didn't apply. And lethal force authorized to protect a record? That wasn't just classified, it was sacred. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Captain Thorne hadn't just insulted a janitor. He had poked a sleeping dragon, a dragon that the entire weight of the U.S. Special Operations Command was sworn to protect. She turned from the computer and walked back to her desk. She didn't use her office phone. Instead, she pulled out her personal cell phone and scrolled through her contacts to a number she hadn't called in years. It was a direct line to the Command Chief Master Sergeant of their numbered Air Force, her former mentor. This was too big for the wing command. This needed to go straight up the chain, and it needed to go fast. She pressed the call button. "Chief, it's Eva Rostova," she said when he answered. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but we have a situation at Creech. A code Cerberus." "No, sir, I'm not mistaken." "Yes, a real 1-inch." She listened for a moment, her face grim. "The asset is a civilian contractor named Corbin. Samuel J. He's being disciplined by a Captain Marcus Thorne. In public. In the main DFAC." The silence on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. When the command chief finally spoke, his voice was strained, tight with a kind of primal fear she had never heard from him before. "Keep your eyes on the asset, Master Sergeant," he commanded. "Do not engage. Do not intervene. Just keep him in your sight. A containment team is being spun up. The 4-star is on his way. God help us all." The call ended. Rostova sank into her chair, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. A 4-star general. A containment team. Code Cerberus, a mythical code word she'd only ever heard whispered about, referring to an incident involving a person or asset of such monumental importance that their exposure constituted a national security crisis. She looked out her office window towards the DFAC. Inside that building, a young, arrogant captain was preening over his little victory, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just, in all likelihood, ended his own career and possibly triggered an international incident by yelling at the man who mopped the floors. Back in the dining facility, the atmosphere remained thick with tension. Captain Thorne had finished his meal and, on his way out, had made a point of stopping near where Samuel was just finishing his cleanup. The floor was now immaculate, far cleaner than it had been before the spill. Samuel was rinsing his mop head in the bucket, his movements still unhurried and precise. "See," Thorne said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "A little motivation is all it takes. Let this be a lesson in meeting standards, Corbin." He didn't wait for a reply. He swept out of the building, a king leaving his court, convinced he had reinforced his authority and taught a valuable lesson in military excellence. He was so wrapped up in his own self-importance that he failed to notice the subtle but dramatic shift happening outside. The first sign was a sound, a low, rhythmic whump 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 that grew rapidly in volume, drowning out the desert wind. Heads on the flight line turned upwards. It wasn't the familiar high-pitched whine of the Reaper drones that Creech was famous for. This was the heavy, percussive beat of rotor blades, big ones. 2 HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters, painted a non-reflective black and bristling with antennae and weaponry, were descending fast towards the base's command sector, ignoring standard flight patterns. They moved with an aggressive, predatory grace that spoke of special operations. They weren't requesting permission to land. They were taking the ground. Simultaneously, at the main gate, a convoy of 4 black Suburbans with tinted windows blew past the security checkpoint without slowing down, causing the guards to scramble in confusion. An alert klaxon began to blare across the base, a signal for an unscheduled high-priority arrival. Inside the DFAC, no one knew what was happening until the building's main doors were thrown open with such force that they slammed against the interior walls. 4 men in tactical gear, armed with short-barreled rifles held at a low ready, swarmed into the room. They weren't wearing standard Air Force uniforms. Their gear was sterile, with no name tapes or unit patches, only the faint outline of an American flag on their shoulders. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency, securing the entrances and exits in seconds. The airmen and civilians in the DFAC froze, trays halfway to their mouths. A shocked silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackle of the commandos' earpieces. Captain Thorne, who had been just outside, turned back at the commotion, his face a mask of confusion and outrage. "What in the world is going on?" he demanded, striding back into the building. "Who are you people? Identify yourselves." The commandos ignored him as if he were a piece of furniture. Their eyes were scanning the room, their movements economical and purposeful. Then, through the doors they had secured, a fifth man entered. He was tall and lean, in his late 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun and wind for a century. He wore a perfectly pressed service dress uniform, and on each shoulder glittered a constellation of 4 silver stars. It was General Wallace Creed, the Supreme Commander of United States Special Operations Command. The sight of a 4-star general, unannounced, in a base DFAC, flanked by a team of Tier 1 operators, was so surreal that for a moment, everyone's brain simply stopped processing it. Every military member in the room, from the lowest airman to the highest-ranking officer present, instinctively snapped to their feet. Thorne was the first to recover. This was his chance to take control, to show leadership in front of a senior general. He strode forward, snapping the sharpest salute of his life. "General Creed, Captain Marcus Thorne, 732nd Operations Group. This is an unexpected honor, sir. What can I do for you?" General Creed's eyes, the color of chipped steel, swept past Thorne, dismissing him with an indifference so profound it was more insulting than any verbal rebuke. His gaze scanned the room, sweeping over the terrified faces of the airmen, the confused kitchen staff, and finally, it landed on the old man in the faded gray jumpsuit standing by his mop and bucket. The general's entire demeanor changed. The hard, granite-like expression softened. The cold fury in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, almost reverential respect. He took a deep breath, and then he did something that shattered the reality of every single person in that room. General Wallace Creed, a 4-star general in command of America's most elite warriors, marched directly past Captain Thorne. He walked across the freshly cleaned floor and stopped 3 feet in front of Samuel Corbin, the janitor. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the single most perfect, sharp, and heartfelt salute anyone present had ever seen. "It's an honor to see you again, Spectre," General Creed said, his voice clear and strong, ringing with a deference that bordered on awe. "You're looking well." The name hung in the air, meaningless to most, but its significance was underscored by the general's posture. He held the salute, his hand trembling slightly, his eyes locked on the old man's face. Samuel Corbin slowly placed his gnarled hands on the handle of his mop. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It's just Sam now, Wally," he said, his voice that same quiet, unassuming rumble. "And you can put your hand down. You're making a scene." The general slowly, reluctantly, lowered his salute. A collective, audible gasp swept through the DFAC. Wally? He had called a 4-star general Wally? Captain Thorne stood frozen, his own hand still glued to his brow in a forgotten salute. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion. Spectre? Wally? What was happening? This was impossible. This was a dream. The world had turned upside down. General Creed finally turned his head, his gaze falling upon the still saluting Captain Thorne. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by an arctic coldness that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. "Captain," the general said, his voice lethally quiet, "my office received a report of an incident at this facility. An incident involving you. And involving this man." He gestured with his chin towards Samuel. "Explain yourself." Now, Thorne's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His brain was failing to compute the impossible tableau before him. The world's most powerful general was paying homage to his janitor. I don't understand, sir," Thorne stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. He's a contractor. A cleaner. He was underperforming." General Creed took a slow, deliberate step towards Thorne, his eyes boring into the captain's soul. The four commandos subtly shifted their positions, their posture radiating a quiet menace. The entire room held its breath. Underperforming, Creed repeated, the words dripping with ice. He let the word hang in the air for a long moment. Captain, your file says you graduated top of your class at the academy. It says you have a master's degree in strategic studies. It seems, for all that education, you have learned absolutely nothing about the world you live in. You have learned nothing about the men who built the very institution that gives you the privilege of wearing that uniform. He turned to face the stunned audience of airmen. His voice rose, taking on the commanding tone of a leader addressing his troops, a historian recounting a sacred epic. You see this man, he boomed, pointing a rigid finger at Samuel Corbin, who stood quietly by his bucket, looking deeply uncomfortable with the attention. You see a janitor. You see an old man in a jumpsuit. Your captain here saw a standard to be enforced. I see a ghost. I see a living legend whose boots you are not worthy to lick, let alone clean. Creed's gaze swept the room, ensuring every eye was locked on his. This is not Samuel Corbin, civilian contractor. This is Chief Master Sergeant Samuel Spectre Corbin, retired. The first, and, to this day, only man to ever hold the Tier 1 operator designation for 40 consecutive years. He was a founding member of a unit so secret, its name is still classified above the level of the President of the United States. A ripple of shock and disbelief spread through the crowd. Chief Master Sergeant. Retired. 40 years. It was an unheard of length of service for any operator, let alone one at the highest echelons. The general wasn't finished. He took a step closer to Samuel, his voice softening with reverence. This man, who Captain Thorne just berated for his glacial pace, is the same man who once spent 18 days motionless in a snowdrift north of the 68th parallel, observing a Soviet missile facility. His heart rate never went above 45 beats per minute. He came back with intelligence that prevented a war. He did it alone. He turned his furious gaze back to Thorne. This man, whose hands you saw holding a mop, are the same hands that disarmed a dirty bomb in a European capital with 3 seconds left on the timer, using nothing but a pocket knife and a piece of chewing gum wrapper. The report on that is still the benchmark for EOD training. He began to pace in front of Samuel, his voice a resonant litany of heroism. They called him Spectre for a reason. In 1983, during Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada, he and his three-man team were declared Kia after their helicopter went down. 2 weeks later, he walked out of the jungle alone, having not only survived, but having also single-handedly dismantled the command structure of the opposition forces. He was listed as dead for 14 days. When he reappeared at the command post, the J-2 intelligence officer fainted. He stopped and pointed at the faint, silvery scar on Samuel's wrist, the one Leo Diaz had noticed earlier. You see the scar? He got that pulling a young lieutenant out of a burning embassy in the Middle East. The building collapsed on them. Spectre held a steel beam up with his shoulders for 4 hours, his bones cracking, until rescue teams could dig them out. That young lieutenant he saved? That was me. The final revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The entire DFAC was utterly silent, the only sound the hum of the ventilation system. Captain Thorne's face had gone from confused to shocked to ashen white. His body was trembling, his perfect uniform suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He has 3 medals of honor, General Creed continued, his voice now low and laced with a sorrowful anger. 2 of which are so secret they were awarded in a locked room with no witnesses and are not listed in any official record. He has 8 Purple Hearts. He has every valor award this nation can bestow, and a dozen more from allied governments who don't even know his real name. He has personally trained every single commander of JSOC for the last 30 years. He wrote the book on infiltration, exfiltration, and counterterrorism. The tactics you studied at the academy, Captain? This man invented them. In the field. Under fire. Creed finally came to a halt directly in front of Thorne, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. And after giving everything a man can give to his country, he decided he wanted a quiet life. He didn't want parades or recognition. He just wanted some peace. He came here, to this base, under an agreement at the highest levels of the Department of Defense, to be close to his grandkids. His only request was to be given a simple job, to be left alone, to be anonymous. He chose to mop floors. Because for a man like Sam Corbin, there is no such thing as a dishonorable job. There is only work that needs doing. The general's voice dropped to a near whisper, a blade of pure ice. And you, in your infinite arrogance, saw fit to publicly humiliate him. You stood on the shoulders of a giant and dared to call him small. You took a man who has bled more for that flag than you could ever comprehend and treated him like dirt for doing the quiet, thankless work he chose for himself. He leaned in until he was nose to nose with the captain. So, you tell me, Captain Thorne, who was truly underperforming in this room today? The legend who was quietly and perfectly doing his job? Or the officer who was so blinded by his own reflection that he couldn't see the history standing right in front of him? Thorne's legs finally gave out. He didn't faint, but he stumbled back, catching himself on a table. His face was a wreck of shame, horror, and the dawning, soul-crushing realization of what he had done. He looked past the general at the old man, at Samuel Corbin, and for the first time, he truly saw him. He saw the weight of history in those pale blue eyes, the quiet strength in his posture, the profound dignity that no insult could ever touch. "Sir," Thorne whispered, his voice broken. I didn't know. That's the whole point, son," Creed roared, the sudden explosion of sound making everyone jump. "You're not supposed to know. You're supposed to treat every single person you meet, from a general to a janitor, with a baseline of dignity and respect, because you never know who they are, what they've done, or what burdens they carry. That is not just the mark of a good officer, it is the mark of a good man, a test which you have failed in the most spectacular fashion I have ever witnessed." General Creed straightened up, his duty face returning. He turned to one of the commandos. "Get the wing commander on the phone. Inform him that as of this moment, Captain Marcus Thorne is relieved of his command, pending a full review by my office. He is to be confined to his quarters. He will not speak to anyone. He will not access any networked systems. His career in the United States Air Force is over." The commando just nodded. "Yes, sir." Thorne looked like he had been shot. Relieved of command. The words were a death sentence for an officer. He opened his mouth to protest, to beg, but he knew it was useless. He had committed a sin for which there was no forgiveness in the rigid, honor-bound world of the military. He had dishonored a hero. As two of the commandos moved to escort the disgraced captain away, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Wally, that's enough." It was Samuel. He had stepped forward, his expression one of weary sadness, not triumph. He looked at the broken captain, then at the furious general. "The boy made a mistake," Samuel said, his voice calm and steady. "He's young, full of pride. We were all like that once." General Creed turned to him, his expression softening again. "Sam, what he did was inexcusable. Maybe," Samuel conceded with a slight nod. "But ruining his life over it? That's not the way. He's learned his lesson. Look at him. He's learned it harder than any lesson you or I could teach him in a classroom." He then looked directly at Thorne. The captain flinched, unable to meet his gaze. "Son," Samuel said, and the simple word carried no condescension, only a sort of grandfatherly pity. "Respect isn't in the rank on your collar. It's in your heart. You carry it inside you, and you give it freely. It doesn't cost you anything. Remember that." With that, Samuel Corbin, the legendary Spectre, turned away. He picked up his mop, swished it in the bucket, and pushed it towards the corner where it belonged. His part in the drama was over. He was just a man who had a job to do. The commandos paused, looking to General Creed for guidance. The general watched his old friend, his mentor, put away his cleaning tools. He saw the profound humility, the unshakable grace of the man. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Change of orders," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Captain Thorne will not be confined to quarters. He will, however, be reassigned. Effective tomorrow at 0600, he will report to the Supervisor of Consolidated Services. He's got a new job. He'll be working with Mr. Corbin, mopping floors. He'll do that for 6 months. At the end of that time, we'll revisit the status of his career. Maybe," the general added, his eyes locking with Thorne's, "he'll learn something about the nature of service and the meaning of standards." He then walked over to Airman Diaz's table. Leo, who had been trying to shrink into his chair and become invisible, went rigid with fear. General Creed looked down at him, and for the first time, A small, genuine smile touched his lips. Master Sergeant Rostova told me what you did, Airman. You showed moral courage. You saw an injustice, and you didn't let it stand. You upheld the honor of the uniform better than your captain did today. I'm proud of you, he clapped Leo on the shoulder. There's a promotion in your future. And with that, the general and his security detail swept out of the DFAC as quickly as they had arrived. The Pave Hawks spooled up and were gone in a thunder of rotor wash, leaving a stunned and silent dining facility in their wake. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of what happened became a legend on Creech Air Force Base. Captain Thorne, now just Marcus to his new co-workers, showed up for duty every morning at 0545, dressed in a gray jumpsuit identical to Samuel's. He learned how to clean grills, scrub floors, and take out the trash. He rarely spoke, but he worked hard. And every day, he worked alongside Samuel Corbin, who treated him with the same quiet, unassuming courtesy he showed everyone. Samuel taught him how to properly mix cleaning solutions, how to get stubborn scuff marks off the linoleum, and how to find satisfaction in a job well done, no matter how humble. The culture of the base changed. The airmen started holding doors open for the civilian contractors. They started saying please and thank you to the kitchen staff. They started looking at the older, quieter members of their community not as relics, but as libraries of unread history. They learned to see the person, not the uniform or the job title. One afternoon, months later, Marcus found Samuel sitting alone at a table after their shift, staring out the window. Marcus, his own hands now calloused and rough, sat down opposite him. Why? Marcus asked, his voice quiet. Why did you do it? You could have let them end me. I deserved it. Samuel turned his pale blue eyes on him. Everyone deserves a second chance, son, he said simply. And revenge. It's a heavy thing to carry. It's much easier to carry a mop. He gave a small, wry smile. Besides, I needed a trainee. My back isn't what it used to be. Marcus looked down at his own hands, then back at the old man who had saved worlds and then, in an act of even greater strength, had saved him. He finally understood. True strength wasn't about demanding respect. It was about earning it through action and giving it freely through grace. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. A story that became a quiet reminder across the force that the most profound legends are often the ones hiding in plain sight. These are the stories that build the foundation of our service, reminding us that heroes walk among us every day. And if you believe in honoring those quiet heroes, then you know that sharing their stories is the most important mission of all.